Okay, okay. Friends, oh, welcome to this evening lecture on political ideology series. This evening, we are going to be familiar with an interesting ideology. It is Gandhism. Friends, today we are not going to talk not about Gandhism as such. Rather, we will first understand what makes the ideology called Gandhism. We don't have that much time to discuss all the aspects related to Gandhism. I will try to confine Gandhism with the two lecture. I won't go beyond two lecture on Gandhi because we don't have that much time. So today I will talk about Gandhi the man, and tomorrow I will talk about Gandhism. So friends, let us talk about Gandhi the man. Friends, I have used a book, Gandhi, A Life Inspired, written by Lynn M. Hamilton. That is my major reference. And also I have referred some other writings for preparing this lecture. But my principal reference point is Gandhi, A Life Inspired by Lynn M. Hamilton. But there are so many books available on Gandhi, very much interesting and easy for you to read. But this is a very good book. But in this lecture, there are points which does not fall into this Lynn Hamilton book. There are so many other references I have used. But primarily, I have used this book by Lynn Hamilton, Gandhi, A Life Inspired. And friends, you see, it was the year 1888. Year 1888. It was a day in the famous London street. A teenage boy aged 19 was walking across the street, lonely, nobody to support. And friends, if you imagine that scenario, majority of you are now at his age, that 19-year-old boy walking across the street, London street, the famous London street, and nobody to support him. He was, lonely, alone. And he was in a famous but bustling city of London, one of the best cities in the world, one of the busiest cities in the world, London. And he was homesick, he was desperate, he was tense and a timid boy, and nobody around to help him. He looked tired and helpless. But he was fierce in his mind of a firm decision he had taken. So though his body, which remained weak, he was firm on that decision. That's why he was walking on that busy London street. And what was it? What was that decision? Friends, he was searching for a vegetarian food in a land where majority of the population are beef eaters. Majority of the population in London are beef eaters. Not only London, the whole of United Kingdom, a majority of the people are beef eaters, and which, according to his belief, was against the core principles of the faith to which he was born. So he was a Hindu by ritualistic observance. He was a Hindu, and according to his Hindu belief system, eating beef is not, a right thing, a right conduct. So his search for vegetarian food had a transcendental, dimension, so something beyond, the physical world. Something beyond his physical world. So he was not comfortable with beef eating, not because of the fact that his body doesn't, need it, but because of his belief. So that's why I told you it had a transcendental dimension. So that day, he had landed in a hotel in London, which you can call the Central Hall, which you can call that hotel the Central Hall. I don't know whether that hotel still exists, but that hotel, it's a restaurant which was, in a sense, a defining place in the whole life of this boy. A defining place in the whole life of this boy, or the man he was called by the world, was in a sense shaped by that place, that Central Hall, that restaurant. Friends, his name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, more commonly known as Mahatma for his followers, and his fierce critic like Ambedkar and Osho. His fierce critic like Ambedkar and Osho used to call him Mr. Gandhi. They call him Mr. Gandhi, but his followers call him Mahatma. And he was born on October 2nd. That day is important day in India's national life. He was born in 1869. He was born in 1869 in Porbandar, in Kathiawar district in India, in the Indian state of Gujarat. So he died on 30 January 1940 at the age of 78. Friends, he was born in a privileged caste, and he was fortunate enough to receive a comprehensive education. But friends, he was a mediocre student. He was not at all interested in studies. An average student or a mediocre student. His father was a prime minister of a princely state in the then, province of Gujarat. He was married when he was only 13 years old. And he was married to a 14-year-old girl called Kasturba. And he had 4 children. And the last child in 1900. And friends, he started a famous practice called celibacy in the year 1906. And he had an extramarital relation with a woman called Kamala Devi. His life was the theme of a famous movie directed by the famous Hollywood director Richard, Attenborough, called Gandhi. The movie was directed in 1982. He wrote a few books, but so many newspaper columns. And his most famous book is Hindu Swaraj, which was written in the year 1909. India of My Dream, 1947. And My Experiments with the Truth. I think that was written in the year 1929. I forgot the exact date. You may refer that. My Experiments with the Truth. And friends, we were talking about that boy called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi walking across the London street. That day, friends, he was stranded, lonely, displaced in the cold, raining city of London. He was many thousands kilometers away from parental affection at that young age. You imagine your own life in a city called London. At your age, if he was in London. And friends, at that age, he was a father. He already had one child. And he was a husband. You imagine the situation of that father called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. At the age of 19, he was in London, but he had a child and a wife in India. So, friends, at an age, 19, most human beings will get the love and care of the parents, which make humans a lovely creature. He was, he missed all these things. So, but he had a mission. He was carrying a mission on his mind. Get education from Great Britain. And study in one of the most famous universities in the world, London. And he had to struggle a lot to go to London. His mother never permitted him to go to London, Putli Bai. So he had to struggle. He had to seek her permission by constantly pressurizing her. So in his society, not only that, friends, in his society called India, where crossing the sea was considered a sin, that was against Hindu belief, that crossing the sea was against Hindu belief, and in infamy according to the religion he was born. And he has overcome all these difficulties. He has overcome the difficulty of his mother, and he has overcome the belief system of his religion, and he went to London. So he was a law student at the University College London, a law student at the University College London, which was a constituent college of the famous Oxford University. He arrived at London from a city called Porbandar of the Indian state of Gujarat in India. And he was born, as I told you, to an extended family of lot of members. His family had a lot of members. And his sea voyage took almost 8 weeks. He struggled with English language. He was not fluent at English. He was an introverted man, an introverted boy. He had the problem of introversion, shyness, and not able to connect with the people. Not only familiar people, he was, so not only strangers, also with familiar people, he was very, indifferent towards them, and he was finding difficult to socialize with his strangers. So he was not able to talk to people. Natural shyness, introverted character. And friends, at University College London, he studied law and jurisprudence, and he was invited to enroll at the Inner Temple with the intention of becoming a barrister. He was enrolled at the Inner Temple with the intention to become a barrister. His childhood shyness and self-withdrawal had continued through his teenage. He retained these traits, that is withdrawal and also shyness, natural shyness. He had retained these traits when he arrived in London. But he joined a public speaking practice at London, and he managed to overcome his shyness, which in fact prevented him becoming a good law practitioner. That's why he joined with a public speaking group in London. At London, friends, he was struggling but his problem was not none of this. His problem was that he had took a vow. That means a promise to his mother, his lovely mother, Putlibai. He had made this vow to his mother, Putlibai. Only after making this promise to his mother, he had given permission to travel to London. So, what was these? What were these? Promises. And most of you remember that 3 vows he made to his mother, Putlibai. What were them? First one, not to use alcohol, not to imbibe in alcoholism. Second, not to engage in extramarital sex. Third, never eat meat. 3 vows he made to his mother, Putlibai. But friends, he was in an old city. These 3 things, this London city is famous for these 3 things. What is that? London was a meat-eating city. It was a city of alcohol culture, and it was famous for its free worldview and sense of personal freedom, liberty, and consensual sex. So it's a society, being shaped by the writings of none other than John Stuart Mill, who wrote the famous book on liberty. So his promises and the place where he is, at now, is contrast. So at Central Hall, the restaurant which we were talking from the beginning, he found a book by Henry Stephen Salt. Henry Stephen Salt. The title of that book is A Plea for Vegetarianism. And friends, he was interested in the philosophy of vegetarianism, and he became a vegan, a pure vegan. And as I told you, he was in London mostly alone. Nobody accompanied him to London, and he was shy and friendless. But he was firm on his promise to the mother, which he made to her in order to get the permission to travel to London. And in London, he found an intellectual circle called the Vegetarian Circle. Vegetarian Circle. So he was basically, as I told you, a well-off family. His father was a provincial prime minister, and he belonged to a Vaishya community, a middle-ranking Hindu caste, and he was the youngest child of his father's fourth wife. In India, those days, men marry many times. That was very usual. What a lovely place India is, right? So his father had, many wives, and he was the youngest child of his fourth wife. So, friends, the time when Gandhi was born, India was under British rule, as we already know. Big rain, big rain. So, audible, friends?
Okay.
Am I audible? Okay. So, friends, during his, by the time he was born, British rule was considered a fact, an unquestioned fact. Nobody in India ever had an idea that British people are foreigners and India should belong to India and British people should quit India. These types of notions were unknown to Indians those days. It was the year 1888. And he was already a father, but nothing prevented him. And he was passionate about what he was doing, not bothering about his wife or child, not about India of his motherland, not about the British rule in India. He was not at all interested in any of these things. He had only one mission: study in Britain. At London, he became a voracious reader. It was a process in the making of the man called Gandhi, a world leader. The reading habit. That reading habit is said to be the principal reason why Gandhi became a world leader. At London, he read Henry Thoreau's Walden, Simple Living in Natural Surrounding, a book which was written in 1854. Walden by Henry Thoreau. Walden, Simple Living in Natural Surrounding. He read it, that book in London. This book really influenced and shaped the man he was. And Gandhi's second master, which you already know, which many of Hindu people would find offensive, was Ruskin. Ruskin Bond. So Ruskin's great book, Unto This Last, that changed Gandhi's life. He used to read that book. So books can do miracles, friends. Books can do miracles. So you may not have heard of the book Unto This Last. Gayatri? So you may not have. Gayatri? Sorry. So books can do miracles. You may not have heard of the books Unto This Last. It's a small pamphlet, and Gandhi was going on a journey. When a friend gifted this book to him to read on the way, because he had liked it very much. Gandhi kept that book with him, not really thinking to read it. But when there was time enough for him to read this book, friends, that book really transformed the man Gandhi. About this incident, a famous Indian spiritual philosopher and spiritual practitioner Osho says that when you say that that book Unto This Last by Ruskin Bond changed Gandhi's life, Osho says, and as you already know, Osho was a famous critic of Gandhi, and Osho says, if I had read that book as Gandhi did, I would not have come to the same conclusion. It is not the book that matters. It is the man who reads, chooses, and collects that matters. And Osho says this in his book, Glimpse of a Golden Childhood, chapter 45. I have referenced that sentences from that book for this lecture. That Osho, Glimpses of a Golden Childhood. It is not the book that's important. The man who read that book is very important. So if I have read that book, I had arrived at a conclusion at variance with Gandhi's conclusion. So I won't think that that book is going to change me. That is what Osho said. But Gandhi said that book changed his life. So maybe their intellectual rivalry. But anyhow, Osho was a fierce critic of Gandhi. And friends, Gandhi shaped his famous idea of civil disobedience from Thoreau, Henry Thoreau. And he transformed Thoreau's civil disobedience into his famous passive resistance notion. That civil resistance was transformed by Gandhi into a principle called passive resistance. So friends, Gandhi came back to India 3 years later after his law studies, and he was aged 22. We have seen him at the age of 19 in the London street, and after his education in London, he came back to India at the age of 22. And he was called on, he was called to the bar in June 1891, and later he left London for India. The call to the bar is a technical term, legal term. That means you are able to defend a client in front of the jury. That is the meaning of that word, call to the bar. And Gandhi got that eligibility from London itself. After that, he came back to India. But friends, his attempt at establishing as a good practicing lawyer in Bombay failed. Why? Because he was psychologically unable to cross-examine witnesses. That means he was not able to question people. He didn't have that character or that ability that to question people, to cross-examine facts, talk to people. These types of traits he was lacking. And he returned to Rajkot to make a modest living, by drafting petitions for people, for litigants. And he was forced to stop this also when he ran afoul of a British officer, Sam Sunny. So he stopped that job also. So his practicing barrister job was unsuccessful. So reason was that, friends, as I told you, that his inclination not to speak lie, and also his inability to cross-examine people, his psychological inability, all this proved that Gandhi was an unsuccessful lawyer. So his career in law ended. But friends, at the age of 23, he joined Dada Abdullah. Dada Abdullah. It was a company in South Africa. And Gandhi was just 23 then. He was just 23 then. He spent 21 years in South Africa. Most of his, most vibrant youth age he spent in South Africa. Or South Africa made the man Gandhi he was. Where he developed his political views, his ethics, his political worldview. So immediately upon arriving in South Africa, Gandhi faced discrimination because of his skin color and heritage, like all the people of color faced in South Africa. He was tasked with supporting lawyers in South Africa of his company, Dada Abdullah. and he was offered a first class train by his company, Dada Abdullah, and the company paid the fee, paid the for the ticket. But a first class travel made the man Gandhi was. The railway staff threw him out of the first class compartment upon the request of a white man. The white man doesn't like Gandhi entering into the first class compartment. And Gandhi pleaded the railway staff that I own the ticket, I have paid for the first class compartment, and I should be permitted. But he was denied entry because of his color and his gene. That day, friends, Gandhi realized one of the important truth in life, that racism. He realized the evils and horror of racism in human society. So friends, in his travels to Johannesburg, he again experienced a severe form of racism. What was that? He was denied entry into a hotel which he had booked during his travel to Johannesburg. And the hotel staff denied admission to the hotel just because of Gandhi's skin color. And the hotel staff denied him room service. And his disastrous train travel and the denial of room in Johannesburg exposed Gandhi to the reality of human social world. And ever since, Gandhi became an activist in South Africa. Gandhi objected to the South African legislation barring voting rights to the Indian communities in South Africa. And he had organized informal meetings with people of Indian origin, which led him to the foundation of Nadal Indian Congress, which looked after the affairs of Indians in South Africa. In 1903, Gandhi realized the power of written words, the power of vocabularies, the power of words, written words. He started a newspaper for his activism. And the name of that newspaper, which you may remember, was Indian Opinion. Indian Opinion resisted abuse through a philosophy called Satyagraha. Satyagraha. It's a principle which he developed in South Africa, but widely used in India against British rule. It's a form of non-violent resistance, Satyagraha. Satyagrahi, the one who practiced non-violence. And he had copied this idea from Jesus Christ, Sri Buddha, Muhammad, and he preached suffering as a fierce weapon against brute torture by enemy or political opponent. The more you suffer, the more the morale of your enemy to torture you becomes softer. So in 1906, friends, he started the famous practice called celibacy. He was aged 38 then. A practice for which he was severely critiqued for being a pedophile and a fake person according to our present day standards. If Gandhi lived in our age, certainly he will be trolled on social media. Certainly he will be attacked on internet. People will rumor about him if he had lived in our age, in our social media age. But those days, in those days standards, it was not a pedophilia. So he took a vow called brahmacharya, that is self control, and he no sexual activity, no physical pleasure in life. So uh, I request you read an article available on the Guardian newspaper, which is available on internet. How would Gandhi's celibacy test with a naked woman be seen today? It was written by Ian Jack, available on free on internet on the website of Guardian newspaper. You can read that, friends. I have referred this for this lecture. Friends, it is the author says that Ian Jack says that Gandhi had a sexual relationship with a woman for 40 years since 1906. That means he was a celibate. He believed sex existed only to procreate and never to enjoy, a view which his political ally or his political student Jawaharlal Nehru found unnatural and shocking. That this Gandhi's view that sex is to procreate. That is what Gandhi's idea about human sexuality. So Gandhi viewed lust was the enemy of mankind, and that lesson he learned when, as a married man in the age of 16, a 16-year-old boy, he had left his sick father besides to be with his wife, and as they made love, his father had died, which he had documented in his book, My Experiments with the Truth. If you read, you will get this idea from that book, My Experiments with the Truth. That he made love with his wife, Kasturba, when his father was dying. So he believed that lust destroys mankind. So thus he began a series of experiments that would not be acceptable in today's era. It's not a standard experiment according to the morality and the personal individuality, sense of individuality according to modern standards. What Gandhi did was wrong from our point of view. So a large number of women slept naked with Gandhi, and some women were willing to partner with him, but others on force. And many women reported that they did it not out of free will, because it was very difficult to oppose Gandhi because he had such a very strong personality, and it was very difficult to say a no to Gandhi when he asked them to sleep with him naked, to test that whether he is a celibate. That he wanted to self-control. And his grandnieces, Abha and Manu, which you may remember, was very difficult to say. So sorry, were his regular walking sticks, and he had even slept naked with Abha and Manu. And Sushila Nair, sister of Gandhi's personal secretary, Parilal Nayar, who was his personal doctor, who took care of Gandhi since her teenage years. She was his regular companion in taking baths. Both of them took bath together. And Sushila Nair reported that he had claimed that he didn't look at Sushila while taking bath together. He was saying that he used to keep his eyes tightly shut when this Sushila Nair and Gandhi took bath together. So he was experimenting with his celibacy. So, and he somewhere he attended a sannyasi like life, adopting simple living, and he said he was leading a simple life, and which was also criticized. Gandhi's simple living was also criticized by many people, and his fierce critic also had critiqued it. And if you go to YouTube, there is a YouTube video titled Mahatma Gandhi's poverty is very costly. Mahatma Gandhi's poverty is very costly. You can it's a 16-minute long video. You can watch it from YouTube. Mahatma Gandhi's poverty is very costly. Osho famously said Gandhi's simple living was too much costlier. That's why the title, Gandhi's poverty is very costly. So in India, railway has 4 classes: air conditioned, first class, second class, and third class. And when Gandhi traveled, He used to travel on third class, of course. And Osho told Gandhi's son once that while Gandhi was traveling on third class, which was already overcrowded, people again come into the third class and it again become overcrowded. So he was, gathering masses in a place which is already overcrowded. So, in a sense, he was, he was what we may say, uh, he was less sensible according to Osho. It's already a third class in India, and in third class, most people in India travel by third class. And when a figure like Gandhi travel in third class, people gather. But surprisingly, his son Ram Gandhi famously replied to Osho, that Osho reported this in this speech, that Mahatma Gandhi's poverty is very costly. That his son replied to Osho that when Gandhi was traveling in third class compartment, the entire compartment is blocked, not allowing people to enter. Look, that's what, this is not my findings, friends. I'm just quoting what Osho said. The entire compartment was blocked when Gandhi traveled in third class. So, because to tour India, he traveled only in third class. Uh, he said that the soul of India lived in village, and the soul of India you can find in third class compartments. And Osho again criticized Gandhi that he drank goat milk, and to feed that goat, the goat milk is very expensive in India. And friends, Osho famously said, nothing of his goat, Osho says in that video. And he was saying that I found that his goat was being very, 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 his goat was had everyday bath, and he had a stylish room, Gandhi's goat. And his goat milk was worth 10 rupee a day. His goat milk was worth 10 rupee a day. According to Osho, Osho's critic, 10 rupee a day is the salary of a school teacher per month in India those days. That we pay 10 rupee per month to a school teacher, which was the daily expense of Gandhi's goat. This is Osho's critic. I don't know the factual clarity, but I am just quoting what Osho said. So that's why Osho said Gandhi's simple life was expensive. But friends, it's a truth that Gandhi was a simple man, and he lived. He had led a simple life. In 1906, friends, I'm just a new bill required all Indians in South Africa to re-register and to fingerprint. And Gandhi addressed Nadal Indian Congress and took a pledge to protest, but through non-violence. That all Indians are required to re-register to cast their votes. And Gandhi at the Nadal Indian Congress objected this idea and advised his followers to protest against this law by the South African legislature. So friends, you might remember last year during university protest on nationalism, a girl student in Delhi offering flower to a soldier in arm. That it was Gandhi's philosophy that even in times of crisis, even times of war or battle, we should love. We should love. So love in protest was a Gandhian technique. So that photo was very famous, and most newspaper covered that news with the picture of that girl offering that girl flower to a soldier in arm. So Gandhi advised his followers that you should protest but non-violently. The love should be there. There should be kind of love in your protest. So he was propagating love and non-violence in protest. It gathered people, and people found a savior in him. He became a leader by this. Hundreds of people of Indian origins joined his call for non-violent protest in the Nadal Indian Congress. Following his request, Indians started non-compliance to registration in the election, and Indians were imprisoned, and Gandhi was also imprisoned. Gandhi was sentenced to detention facility because for organizing people against this legislation of re-registering and also fingerprinting on voters register. So, but in 1905, friends, he was sorry, in 1915. In 1915, he was called back to India in 1915. So on the day January 9, 1915, after over 21 years of life in South Africa, Gandhi returned. And on January 9, 1915, that day is considered as Diaspora Day by Government of India. And friends, Gandhi, in 1915, Gandhi came back to India, and he already became, in 1915, Gandhi already became an activist, a writer, a human rights advocate, a civil rights activist, and he had an international fame. Gandhi had an international fame. He was primed for social action for the liberation of his country. But friends, early in the beginning, Gandhi was unclear about his role in India. Like most Indians, he had no direction. That he showed loyalty to the empire in the beginning. That's why he went to London for studying law. Of course, he was criticized for his, loyalty to empire in the beginning by his critic. After the First World War, Gandhi wished to redistribute his country. He studied the problems of village and gave speeches, and his speech became famous. And in 1915, he met with Tagore, the great Indian poet, the Nobel laureate, and Tagore gave him the famous name Mahatma. Tagore gave him the famous name Mahatma. In 1915, he started cooperative farm in Sabarmati Ashram. Cooperative farm in Sabarmati Ashram in 1915. And again a cooperative in Ahmedabad among manufacturers of textiles. A second cooperative in Ahmedabad. And he delivered a famous speech at the Banaras Hindu University. And he fiercely critiqued Indian National Congress. And this speech is very famous because that was a turning event in the entire history of Indian National Congress. He criticized Indian National Congress for its elitist character, that the leaders of the Indian National Congress, do not have any kind of touch with the ordinary people in India. Because India lives in its village. Its soul is its village. And people toil their life in the villages, the teeming millions, the poverty-stricken, unemployed, desolate people of India lives in its village. But this Indian National Congress, urban centered, elite educated, British educated, English speaking people who have no connection with the masses. And Gandhi fiercely critiqued the Indian National Congress in the 1915 famous speech at the Banaras Hindu University, which became a turning event in the entire history of Indian National Congress. And Gandhi attained fame within the circles of Indian National Congress, and people began to love him. He got people's applause. And friends, he started helping indigo farmers of Champaran and traveled to Champaran. In Champaran, British people were compelling villagers to cultivate indigo. But people were opposing that idea. And they objected, and Gandhi joined the cause of the villagers. It was in 1917. So 1916. Gandhi was arrested at Champaran, but he was released in 1917 by the protest of farmers. That was his first open strike in India, Champaran Satyagraha. So he was headed to another problem of the farmers of Kheda, which was later called Kheda program, famous Gandhian program technique of Satyagraha. So farmers of Kheda paid tax to British Raj. And the protest steered by Gandhi did not result in satisfying all the people, but the protest was successful. That was his second mass strike in India. And he already practiced by 1917. You can see that Gandhi already practiced Champaran and Kheda, and he came back 2 years ago. That he came to India, arrived in India in the year 1915. By 1917, he had already took leadership of two important events, Champaran and Kheda. And he now realized Britain is India's problem. That was in 1917. Gandhi realized Britain is India's problem. So, friends, he got a direction and a focus in the year 1917. So, he identified who is our real enemy. Friends, it is very important to consider this fact that Gandhi discovered that our enemy is Britain. That, friends, it's important in the sense that you just notice that our present day leadership, they have no agenda. Most of our activism, most of our political leaders these days, their activism go in vain. Why? Because they have no idea about who is the real enemy, what is our problem, what is our plan of action. So this happens to our student politics, our politicians, our leaders, and all. Look, they have no idea of what ails our society. Our leadership have no idea of what ails our society. They have no idea of who our enemy is. Look, Gandhi by 1917 realized that who our enemy is. In the year 1919, friends, in the year 1919, Gandhi took a pledge. He wanted to liberate India from Britain. So, friends, by then, Britain passed an infamous act called Rowlatt Act in the year 1909, which you may remember reading from history classes. That it's an act which allows police to arrest any person without trial and jury, without any evidence. Simply Britain can arrest any person in India who is suspected of engaging in activities against Raj in India. So this you should connect with the UAPA. Now in India, Rowlatt Act was passed by Britain to resist and destroy any attempt by Indians to torpedo British rule in India. That's why this black this what may be called black law was passed. And friends, this act considers people arrested by the act as traitors and against British Raj. That's what Rowlatt Act. So UAPA is same, but UAP is charged against people by a government who is in power by the same people. That is a dilemma or the tragedy of UAPA. Rowlatt Act was passed by a foreign government, but when act like UAPA is passed by our own government against its own people, it's it's a really a contrast. What may be called is a real predicament. So in a sense, there is not much difference between a Rowlatt Act and a UAPA Act in that sense. So Gandhi, friends, Gandhi viewed this act was a serious encroachment on civil rights and civil liberty. Bill provoked Gandhi to launch the first civil disobedience in India. Muslims and Hindus from all walks of life joined in his protest. In Amritsar, 4 Europeans were killed. And General Dyer, a reaction led to Jallianwala Bagh massacre on April 1919. It happened following the arrest of two freedom fighters by Britain. You remember, in 1919, April, to celebrate Baisakhi, a festival, thousands of Sikhs, Muslims, Hindus assembled in a garden in Jallianwala Bagh, and Dyer arrived in the entrance by 3:30 p.m. and 19 soldiers accompanied him, General Dyer, and they entered into the garden through the entrance and they lined up and 50 of that 19 soldiers who accompanied General Dyer were armed with the famous Lee Enfield bolt action rifle. Lee Enfield bolt action rifle. And Dyer ordered his men to fire the unarmed people who gathered there to celebrate Baisagi. And you see, friends, Britain admitted later that they used 1,650 bullets in the famous Jallianwala Bagh massacre. They used 1,650 bullets. But British Raj reported that only 379 people died. But that was untrue. International Congress itself reported that 1,500 people died. So there are anomaly in the facts. And Gandhi, friends, with this event, Gandhi officially joined the freedom movement and he realized the problem of British Raj. And Gandhi officially joined Indian National Congress in the year 1919. It was in 1919 Gandhi officially joined Indian National Congress. And cloth was at the heart of his action plan. That he found cloth, khadi, as a uniting force in India that will unite the Bengalis, the Keralites, the Tamils, the Gujaratis, the Marathis. All the people will be united by cloth. So we need some symbols. He realized that one of the important symbols which can unite people in India is cloth. So he understood the power of cloth. And Gandhi asked his fellow countrymen to desist from using foreign clothes, Britain-made cloths. This idea is called Swadeshi. This idea is called Swadeshi, that a society should be a self-reliant society. Self-reliance is liberation. Friends, we should be able to stand on our own feet. That, we should never depend other people. We should never depend anyone in life. It means we have to be self-reliant. So a nation and its people should be self-reliant. An individual in a society should be self-reliant and a nation should be self-reliant. That's called Swadeshi. So we should cultivate what we should eat. We should weave the cloth that we used to wear. So he called on the Indian women to revive the cottage industry. In 1922, Gandhi called for people of Bardoli withhold the taxes. Bardoli Satyagraha, 1922. It was a call for civil disobedience. And friends, he asked people to stop paying tax to Britain of people in the Bardoli district. And Gandhi was arrested and sentenced for 6 years in prison. So, but he was released in the year 1924. And friends, by the year 1922, when Gandhi was released from prison by Britain, India was already divided on a religious line by our own mind. That communal tension had already increased. And in 1924, Gandhi performed what may be called his famous fasting. And fasting in his Satyagraha was the last weapon. It was the last weapon and the last weapon of a Satyagrahi. And Gandhi's advised his followers to use it rarely. Only on such occasions where there is no other way, you have to resort to fasting. So Gandhi advised his followers to perform fasting as last method of a Satyagrahi. So look now, friends, you see, people are freely and what may be called, generously using fasting as a weapon against their political opponent. So people these days use fasting as a show business. So morning they start and end up the fasting in the evening. Some people even start, relay fasting. You remember in front of the secretariat, people are relay fasting. So they stop their fasting by the time of lunch or dinner, and another person come into the scene, and the other person will take charge of the fasting, and it go, like a chain. This is the, fasting show business of our contemporary politicians. But, friends, Gandhi's fasting is not like this. Gandhi's fasting is fast till the last breath. If you are not able to achieve your goal, you die with fasting. That's why Gandhi advised the followers to practice it as a last resort. So in 1925, Bardoli company increased tax to 21%. And Gandhi and Patel started Bardoli strike in Bardoli district. So he again and again engaged in political activism, strikes, civil disobedience, you know. And friends, in 1930, the famous Salt March, few grains of salt changed the history of one of the finest civilizations in the world, India. Changed few grains of salt, changed the entire history of India in the year 1930. And already Gandhi had started pleading people to boycott British made fabrics. And next step was a challenge, Salt Act of 1882. Friends, Lord Irwin lodged it, and Gandhi's intention was to harvest his own salt, and he was set to defy British rules by salt march. And he started out from Assam on 12 March 1930. A huge crowd followed him through his long walk, and all the followers wore khadi dress, and this prompted people to call the march the white flowing river, because all the people are lined up in white cloth, khadi cloth. That's why it is called white flowing river. So it took almost 24 days, and they covered 240 miles. Friends, Gandhi was aged 61 then. He walked barefoot. He walked almost 12 miles a year, 12 miles a day. Once he arrived in Dundee, he picked up salt rock, and defied the Salt Act. This campaign was one of his most successful upsetting of British rule in India. Britain responded by imprisoning over 60,000 people. So friends, he told, am I audible, friends?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So he told his followers, make your own salt, burn English cloths, stop untouchability, spin your own cloth, stop alcohol, treat all the people as siblings. And during his prison life, Gandhi launched a famous newspaper called Harijan, which tried to call attention to the civil and human rights violations in India. That was purpose of Harijan, that to call into attention the civil and human rights violations in India. So Gandhi was concerned with Dalit, women, and he objected Parda system, and he objected dowry. And friends, in 1940, Jinnah was agitating for a Muslim cause. And in 1942, Gandhi started, Quit India movement in the Bombay session of International Congress. In the Bombay session of International Congress, Gandhi demanded an immediate end to British rule in India. Cripps mission had already failed. Gandhi cited do or die in his Quit India speech at the Bombay at Govalia Tang Maidan. That's a famous, park in Tardio, central Mumbai, where Mahatma Gandhi issued the Quit India speech on 8 August 1942. And friends, in 1944, Gandhi met Jinnah, but they were not able to find a common ground. India had already bifurcated by mentally. Mentally, India already bifurcated because Hindus and Muslims became strong enemies. And by 1945, the United Kingdom announced the plans to quit India. And by this time, Gandhi was committed for Hindu-Muslim unity, and he was traveling. Both Jinnah and Gandhi announced the people of India to keep peace and tolerance to both the communities. But friends, what happened is that mass massacre followed due to communal riots and and following partition, the brute reality of India was exposed. So Gandhi was, after partition of India, Gandhi was at Birla House. Now it is called Gandhi Smriti. Uh, in on 13 January 1948, time 5:17 p.m. evening, 5:17. Almost now it's 5:35. Few minutes ago, this time, Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Vinayak Godse for an ideology towards which he belonged. So this date is considered in India's national life as Martyr Day. So Gandhi stayed in Birla House for almost 144 days from 9 September 1947 to 30 January 1948. After partition of India, after India's independence, Gandhi was not involved in active, national politics, but rather he had some other missions. So he was staying at Birla House. That was the ancestral home of Birla family. And Birla House was purchased by Government of India in the year 1971 for a whopping amount of 5.4 million US dollar from the Birla Company. This house where Gandhi was assassinated, which was later purchased by Government of India for 5.4 million. Now it's cost maybe billions. It costs billions today. But that day, $5.4 million means a huge amount for the Government of India that the exchequer paid. We paid that money for Gandhi. But anyway, friends, this is what I have to tell you about Gandhi the man. And tomorrow I will tell you what Gandhism is. Friends, you can have questions now.